What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Okay, so I got a fascinating video for you guys today. We're getting into the Second Amendment, as a matter of fact, something I don't really touch upon all that much. But today, a appellate court judge in California, of all places, just went absolutely ham on all the other justices on the court. It was fabulous, y'all. And I've got some clips from the he actually made a video. You're going to see the clips, but check this out. We'll get into the headline, read a little bit of the news, and then I'll show you some of these clips right quick. Check this out. California Appeals Court upholds ban on higher capacity magazines, spurring unusual video dissent. Yeah, let's read this first little line, then we'll get into this right quick. An appeals court ruled Thursday that California's law banning gun magazines that hold more than 10 rounds of ammunition can remain in place, a decision that prompted one judge to record an unusual video dissent that shows him loading guns in his chamber. That is a lie. That is a blatant lie. As a matter of fact, I went through the entire video. There were no rounds in any of the magazines. As a matter of fact, he disabled the guns for safety purposes. Check this out.
I'm Judge Van Dyke, and welcome to my chambers. I'm making this video as part of my opinion in the Duncan v. Bonta case. In this case, the state of California made the argument, which the majority has now accepted, that a magazine holding more than 10 rounds is just an accessory, not an arm protected by the Second Amendment's right of the people to keep and bear arms. I think anyone with a basic familiarity with firearms could show you that this attempted distinction is simply inconsistent with reality. I alluded to this during oral argument when I asked California's counsel about the balance of the tests that are proposed for what qualifies as an arm protected by the Second Amendment. I also want to emphasize that, for safety purposes, I have rendered inoperable all the guns and gun parts that I use to demonstrate today.
So this thing was pretty well put together. I mean, it was kind of just thrown together right quick. You could tell there was not much production that went into it, but he was very professional, as you would expect from an appellate judge. But that's pretty much standard for this video. But let's keep going, because he makes a few arguments in here, and then he just absolutely destroys their position. But let's keep going right quick. The Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled 7-4 that the law was permissible under the Second Amendment because large capacity magazines are not considered arms or protected accessories, which is insane. Even if they were, California's ban fails within the nation's tradition of protecting innocent persons by prohibiting especially dangerous uses of weapons and by regulating components necessary to the firing of a firearm, the opinion stated. Judge Lawrence Van Dyke disagreed and included a link to a video himself posted on YouTube in his dissent. This is the first, yeah, blah, blah, blah. That's what he says, all that in the video. In the video, Van Dyke handles several guns in his chambers and demonstrates how they are loaded and fired. He also shows high-capacity magazines and argues that they are no different from other gun accessories that could be added to a firearm to make it more dangerous under the majority's logic, he said. That would allow the government to pick and choose any of them banned.
Now, I want to use this handgun to illustrate first California and the majority's argument as applied to this obviously typical and very common handgun, and then I want to show you that the same argument would apply to other parts of the firearm and to this firearm as a whole. Now, as a reminder, California's argument, which the majority's adopted here, is that a magazine that holds more than 10 rounds is not an arm protected by the Second Amendment. So this 21-round magazine that comes from the factory or a 17-round magazine is not an arm protected by the Second Amendment. Now, California acknowledges that a magazine is necessary to make the firearm function, but they argue that because you can replace the standard magazine with one that holds fewer rounds, 10 rounds or less, then these higher capacity magazines are not an arm and thus wholly unprotected by the Second Amendment. Now, the problem with California's argument is that, as I pointed out in oral argument, the exact same argument would apply to essentially every part on this firearm, which would mean that essentially nothing on this firearm would be protected by the Second Amendment. Allow me to illustrate that using this firearm. Now, at oral argument, I asked California's counsel if their argument meant that the sights on this firearm are not protected by the Second Amendment. And part of the reason I'm making this video is because it didn't appear that counsel understood what I was asking. So take a look again at this handgun. What you see on here are iron sights. You have a front and a rear iron sight. And the way that you fire this handgun, the way you aim it, is you take and you line up these two sights and you line them up on what you want to shoot at. And that's how you hit what you're aiming at with this firearm. These are iron sights. They're probably the most common sighting system for a handgun. And But all you have to do on this particular handgun to change out the sights is remove 2 screws in this slide right here, and the back sight comes off. And when you do that, you can put the 2 screws back into a red dot optic, and now you will have a firearm that instead of having iron sights would have a red dot optic. Let me illustrate that by just taking a slide where I've already installed the red dot optic, and here you go. See, so now you have this back iron sight's been taken off, and here's a red dot optic. Now,
you know, and what I find so fascinating about all this is they lack the logic on this. And I understand, you know, it's appellate court, judges, they can't rule in such a manner. But the logic of these situations should actually play into this. Criminals, people that commit heinous acts of violence, do not care about laws. You can make up all the laws you want. It does not matter, right? If there are high-capacity magazines out there, people will get their hands on them. People will use them. So it doesn't matter what laws you make. You can make up all the laws in the world. That's why we have this thing called criminals. They don't care about the laws. They will break the laws. They don't care about your ban on these magazines, right? These people, it seems like their logic is, okay, if we ban these magazines, they just magically don't exist anymore in the wild for some reason. Like, it makes absolutely no sense. And it also makes absolutely no sense because, you know, we have places like Lockheed Martin. There's all kind of companies. I can't think of them right off the top of my head. But, you know, who keeps and bears nuclear weapons, right? So, right, I know you might think the United States Army, right? But who makes them? The United States doesn't make them. The government does not make nuclear weapons. Private companies make and keep nuclear weapons, as a matter of fact, because they have to keep them after they make them to transfer to the federal government. So hang on, I know that's kind of a hyperbolic argument there, but needless to say, these dangerous weapons exist out there in the wild. Because you ban them doesn't mean you're going to save lives. And that's the argument that they make. Judge Marsha S. Berzon criticized Van Dyke's video in a separate opinion, saying he was including facts outside the record and was, in essence, appointing himself as an expert witness, which is funny because of this.
And finally, as an appellate body, it's obviously not our role to make factual determinations, so I share this not to supplement the factual record that we're using to decide this case. Instead, I share this because a rudimentary understanding of how guns are made, sold, used, and commonly modified makes obvious why California's proposed test and the one my colleagues are adopting today simply does not work. I'm sure I could explain all of this in writing without being accused of improper fact-finding, but it's obviously much more effective to simply show you. So let's do that now.
Yeah, he actually states that. He's like, this is not what I'm doing, but she says this anyway. What an insane nut job, if you ask me. The law has remained in effect as the state appealed a 2023 ruling by a district court judge in San Diego that was unconstitutional. The ruling was in response to legal action filed by 4 individuals and the California Rifle and Pistol Association challenging the law's constitutionality under the Second Amendment. The majority opinion judges said their decision to uphold the law is in line with a Supreme Court ruling in 2022 that sets a new standard that relies more on the historical tradition of gun regulation rather than public interest, including safety. You know what's funny? You can see right there in the title, and when you click on that, because I was interested because I only remember one ruling from the Supreme Court which actually expanded gun rights. And guess what, folks? When you click on that little dot right there, that little link, that's what you get. Oh, look at that, would you? Oh, we expanded gun rights. What are they talking about here? California Attorney General Rob Bonta praised the appeals court decision. This common sense restriction on how many rounds a gunman can fire before they must pause to reload has been identified as a critical intervention to limit a lone shooter's capacity to turn shootings into mass casualty attacks. Bonta said in a statement, "Let me be clear, this law saves lives. No, it doesn't." Once again, this person is inserting himself. Is he an expert? I would love to ask this guy a question. So you believe that this law saves lives. Can you quantify how many lives this law is going to save? You cannot. You absolutely cannot, because you cannot tell me that criminals will not misuse these weapons in such a fashion to commit crimes for the purpose of committing a crime, to break the law on purpose. People do this. This is insane. These people take this. Oh, we're standing up for your civil rights. But hang on. Oh, Judge Van Dyke over here has something else to say about that. As a matter of fact, check this out.
So under California's logic, because this is an accessory, this little takedown lever, it could be replaced with a worse part. This little takedown lever is not protected. It's not part of the arm protected by the Second Amendment. Well, you might ask yourself, well, what about the grip? Like, you think this grip, certainly it must be part of the arm. I mean, it seems like that's a pretty key part of a firearm, is the grip of a pistol. Well, actually, under the majority's argument, it would not be protected. And the reason is, here's a bunch of grips that I've accumulated over the years. Well, this part, the FCU, I guess, is the arm protected by the Second Amendment. Every other part that you added, as I've just shown you, every other part that you added could easily be characterized, just like the magazine, as an accessory that you add to the firearm, and therefore could be banned under the Second Amendment. But not so fast. Even this part, the FCU, the core basic part of the firearm, could be banned under the majority's rationale. And the reason is, let me show you another FCU. This is the FCU for my competition gun. It has a really nice trigger, a nice light, crisp trigger, and has some parts replaced in here. It makes for a really nice trigger. You can upgrade the trigger to make it much nicer. And so, because of that, under the majority's logic, you could even ban this FCU, or at least most of it, as simply an accessory. But you could easily downgrade all of these factory parts of the handgun to make the firearm less accurate and slower. You could put in worse than factory trigger. You could require worse sights than what it comes with from the factory. You could require a grip be put on that hurts the speed and accuracy. Indeed, this type of downgrade is precisely what the majority is actually requiring in this case. As we mentioned earlier, this comes from the factory with a 21-round magazine, or it comes with a 17-round magazine in a slightly different configuration. But the majority is requiring that these factory standard parts be replaced with worse than factory parts, a 10-round magazine. So when we take everything off that the majority might call it accessory, what we're left with at best is this fire control unit. And as I've explained, even that could be dumbed down so that much of this fire control unit would be an accessory under California's argument. And of course, you can't shoot this, right? It's inoperable. You need all the other accessories that I've been describing in order to make this work as a firearm. But of course, also, each of these other pieces, just like this magazine, could in some way be considered an accessory, since they could be replaced with a different part that would be less useful and make the gun less dangerous.
I mean, he just completely destroys their logic on this. And I love this. I love these types of videos, because he takes their arguments and he feeds it back to them. He reconfigures it logically, feeds it back to them. This is what you are doing. You are essentially making guns illegal. That is unconstitutional, and you cannot do that. These people don't know what they're doing. They're virtue signaling, thinking that they're saving lives. As a matter of fact, I think it's a grift. Somehow it's a grift to keep themselves, and not for money, to keep themselves in power, to keep themselves virtuous, and to where people look up to these people. And that, to me, is the worst type of person, right? It's what Jordan Peterson called, toxic compassion. There you go, folks. It's toxic compassion. When you are so virtuous that, okay, hang on, let's burn the Constitution because, it saves lives. Yeah, let's burn the But what they're really doing in reality is they're taking a dump on the floor and wiping their butthole with the Constitution, is essentially what they're doing, because we have the right to keep and bear arms. That is a fact. It does not, distinguish between what type of arms and blah, 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 blah. Back in the day, when the Constitution was writ, as a matter of fact, you had privateers. These people had warships, cannons, the most powerful weapons on the planet at the time. You could go around and destroy cities with these things, right? That wasn't banned under the Constitution. That's really dangerous right there, right? And, you can go out there and you can get automatic machine guns, but you have to go through so much red tape. It's absurd to do so. Look, and I understand that. We don't want people driving around with 50 cals on their Cybertruck, right? If you know what I'm talking about, right? But these arguments just make no logical sense when you break it down, because, once again, criminals don't care about your laws. They just don't. That is a fact. Just having more bullets in a magazine doesn't make the gun more dangerous. Sure, like, if you have less rounds in the magazine, you'll have to reload quicker, right? This is another, I guess, fallacy, if you will, because all the person is going to do, if they can't get their hands on larger magazines, all they're going to do is get more magazines, because you can just go and order these online, for crying out loud. And as a matter of fact, if these magazines are available in other states in the country, well, you could just, go vacation in a different state, order something to an address there, blah, blah, blah. You get your magazine, go back, and then commit your crime however the heck you want to. So it's just absurd. Unless, once again, the only way to get actual gun control is you have to go and confiscate all weapons from everybody within the United States. No military has weapons. No police officers have weapons. You get it, right? Because if there are still weapons within the country, people will figure out ways to get their hands on these weapons. And you will have guns out in the wild, outside of the law, and people will use these to break the law. So your laws do not matter if there are people willing to break them. Of course, that's why we put these in place, because there's consequences for breaking these laws, right? But if you're trying to save lives, making up new laws is not going to save lives. Not when it's just chipping away at a good, upstanding citizen's rights. That makes no sense to me, right? You're taking away the rights. Let's burn the Constitution once again to save lives over here. This is exactly what they're doing, and I can't stand it. And these activist judges, it just blows my mind. This guy is based, and what's funny, I'm going to end this out with another clip of this guy actually making the argument with the defense lawyer. I think it's the defense or the prosecution. I'm not sure. I don't care. But he's making the argument, and the guy clearly doesn't understand. Y'all check this out.
Can I ask you a question about that? Because
yes, Your Honor.
So the way you're treating magazines, it seems like you could use the same sort of rationale as between a non-semi-automatic firearm, say a lever action or a bolt action or a revolver type action, and a semi-automatic firearm. So I'm trying to figure out if you're saying, well, what we do is we say, have people ever banned particularly dangerous rounds? And now we're saying large capacity magazines are particularly dangerous. Why couldn't that same reasoning be used to ban semi-automatic firearms altogether? To say, because think about it, like during the Revolutionary War, if the United States had semi-automatic firearms that only held 5 to 10 rounds, it would have been about 10 minutes and it would have been over, right, as against muskets. So clearly, the semi-automatic mechanism is way, 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 way more particularly dangerous than the delta between a 10-round magazine and a 15-round magazine. So why does your reasoning not mean that, if this reasoning works, why does your reasoning not mean that a state could just ban the semi-automatic firearms altogether?
So if we're just start talking, Your Honor, about this initial sort of textual question, I think if you're dealing with a semi-automatic, that would fit the definition of an arm.
No, but that semi-automatic could be a revolver. Like it could be, just like that high-capacity magazine could be a lower-capacity magazine.
Right, Your Honor. So I think that would fit the definition of arm, and then you'd move on to the other aspects of the Bruen analysis. At stage one, is a particular weapon that's being addressed by the law in the tradition of dangerous and unusual? Is it in common use for self-defense? And we think Heller is clear that has to consider the character as well as the numbers.
I'm not understanding I think I'm missing your response to my. It seems to me that just as you could say, are you saying that yes, so it would be an arm under, you're not conceding that it would be an arm under stage one. So why are you saying it wouldn't be an arm, but the semi-automatic versus revolver, say, distinction is something that we're stuck with. I mean, you would agree that you can't ban the automatic mechanism.
Well, an automatic mechanism, I think that you can ban. I think the Supreme Court has recognized
No,
that.
the automatic mechanism is a term that semi-autos and full autos use an automatic mechanism.
Sure, Your Honor. I'm sorry for the confusion. No, I don't think that we could ban all semi-automatic weapons. I think Heller makes that clear. The point I was just making is, with respect to accessories, I think we have a difference of opinion where my friends suggest any accessory that is somehow helpful to armed self-defense.
So that's important, because your argument turns on whether you can characterize accessory. So you would say that the revolver versus semi-automatic is not an accessory, but that a magazine is this accessory. So what would you think about like a red dot sight, electro-optics, which many firearms are going to electronic optics nowadays. They're obviously an accessory because you could have iron sights. Could you ban those?
Well, so, Your Honor, I'm not intimately familiar with that, and I do want to answer this question and make sure that I save time for rebuttal. I think that the question at the outset would be, is that, if it's an accessory, is it within the Teixeira principle that it's necessary to the realization of the right to self-defense? And you'd have to build a record and analyze it in that case.
So he just doesn't seem to get it whatsoever. He's basically saying that the iron sights on there make the gun more dangerous, right? So under that law, like he explained in that video, that the iron sights, do you want to take those away because it makes it more dangerous? Because that's how you line up your shot. These iron sights were put in place for a specific reason, right? It would also make the gun unusable, like almost unusable, for self-defense purposes. And this is the argument from the judge. What you're taking away from these weapons is taking away from our ability to defend ourselves. That's just how it is, right? And like he breaks down, you could break that all the way down to, hang on, the grip, everything, like he explained out in that video, is now, everything makes the gun more dangerous because it makes it easier to use, quicker to use, shoots better, blah, 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 whatever. Easier to pull the trigger, any and all of the above, right? So the logic of these, once you dip into that logic, you realize that these people ain't making no sense at all, and it's just meant to take your rights away for them to virtue signal to their constituency. That's all gun laws are meant to do. They think they're saving lives. Some people, I imagine, some of them do actually think that, if we take guns away, if we make these red flag laws, like that, no. All that does is take rights away from people. Takes their due process, right? Because, if you say, Jim down the street, he's mentally unstable, you call the cops because he has guns in his house. They go to Jim down the road and they take his guns, and then he goes through due process to get them back. Well, that's not how the Constitution is supposed to work. Due process is meant for before your rights are taken away, if you know what I mean. Right? So it just doesn't these laws don't make any sense. It's all a giant virtue signal. The hypocrisy from Democrats is always on display, y'all. But I think that's all I got on this one. I think I made my point quite clear. Y'all let me know what y'all think about all this down in the comment section. Blows my freaking mind right away. I know, pun intended, right? But y'all let me know what y'all think. That's all I got on this one. I want to thank everybody for watching, and y'all try to have a good day. Stay legitical. Peace.